has 40 years experience as an executive coach, organization development consultant, and consulting psychologist. He's an active executive coach with C-level executives in many sectors and regions of the world. Lou is especially committed to ensuring dignity in coaching. He commits half of his time to pro bono coaching with CEOs and board chairs in nonprofits to bring the power of coaching to leaders around the world who want to influence environmental sustainability, international peace, and quality of life. I've met Lou on many occasions, and he is just such an authentic and brilliant and caring individual, so I feel so delighted to have him as moderator today. And with that, Lou, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thank you. That's a short order to live up to. I appreciate that. I will try to be as brilliant and authentic as possible. Thank you so much, Donna, for being here, and Stephanie for organizing and keeping us together. Let me do a quick introduction of Donna and what we're planning to do. Dr. Donna Hicks is an associate at the Weatherland Center for International Affairs at Harvard University, where she was deputy director of the program on international conflict analysis and resolution for 9 years. She has worked extensively on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, conflicts between communities in Sri Lanka, in Colombia, and between the US and Cuba, and in the Northern Irish conflict. Dr. Hicks has taught courses in conflict resolution at Harvard, Clark, and Columbia universities, and conducts training and educational seminars in the US and abroad on the role that dignity plays in healing and reconciling relationships in conflict. She is the author of the book Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict. We are not going to be talking just about conflict today, but the application of the essential elements of dignity within the coaching relationship, the coaching practice, and coaching in general. I had the privilege of moderating Donna's presentation on dignity in coaching at last year's Harvard Conference on Coaching and Leadership in Healthcare. She will be presenting on the importance of dignity, its key elements, and the temptations that we all face to violate our own dignity. We will then entertain your questions and comments to drive a dialogue between Donna and me on how to maximize dignity on the part of all of the key constituents of coaching. Donna, thank you so much for being with us today. It's your turn.
Oh, you're welcome, Lou, and thank you. Thank Stephanie and everyone who's taking part in this webinar. It's really exciting for me to be able to share something that I've learned over the years with my work, as Lou mentioned, in international conflict. And that is the important role that dignity plays, not only in resolving these conflicts, but in actually creating conflict. And one of the major insights that I had when my book came out, and after I started presenting these ideas to people all over the world, is that this issue of dignity is not just about international conflict or politics or conflict and conflict resolution. This issue of dignity is so fundamental. It's core to the human experience. And before I go into any detail about the relationship with coaching, I really want to give you and share with you, number one, why I think dignity is so important. And secondly, we're going to talk about what dignity is, because honestly, there are many misconceptions about dignity, real sort of common misconceptions, and I want to address those. And I want to also just give you some other building blocks that will help you in understanding yourself why this is so important. And frankly, my guess is that you already know a lot about dignity. Every single one of you knows a lot about dignity because it's just, as I said, so fundamental to our lives and our relationships. What you may not have at your fingertips is how to actually concretely and practically talk about it. And I think, I really believe that this might be the one contribution that I've made, giving people an opportunity to talk about what dignity is, what it means. For example, let's say you had a really bad encounter with somebody and you walk away and you end up just feeling miserable. Well, 9 times out of 10, you end up feeling miserable because most likely your dignity was violated in that exchange. So just giving people a language, I think, is really my biggest contribution, a language to talk about something that is frankly universal. And this, I put this slide up by John Nesbitt because it really summarizes what I think is the urgency around this issue of dignity. So he says the most exciting breakthroughs of the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. So when I started researching this issue of dignity, because I discovered that in my work in conflict resolution, this was the issue, this dignity issue, the way people felt they were treated or mistreated, was at the core of these conflicts, these big political conflicts all over the world, and yet nobody was talking about it. Nobody was talking about this fundamental human reaction to having your dignity violated. So I realized, you know what, this is something that I have to research. I have to look. I want to be absolutely sure I know what I'm talking about when I present this work. And here's the thing about the expanding concept of what it means to be human. We human beings share a significant amount of we have a significant amount of commonality. We share so many experiences, and yet we're not really all that used to talking about our common shared humanity. And you know, largely I think it's because for so many years we've been focusing on this really crucial aspect of our human experience, which is what our differences are. We've spent so much time talking about diversity, and I'm proud of the work that we've done on diversity. I think we've made huge strides on understanding each other's differences. The problem is that's not where we need to finish. We have another job yet to do beyond understanding our differences, which is bringing us all back together again and trying to understand what it is that unites us. And I believe this common human experience of dignity, this common shared universal yearning to be treated well, this shared experience of wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to be listened to, this issue of dignity is what can bring us all back together again. And in fact, I believe it's our highest common denominator. It's this human highest common denominator. And, you know, as I said, we're not really used to looking at ourselves at the level of, you know, the human species. We're much more comfortable thinking about culture and differences and all of that. But this is something that every member of the human species shares. So I'm going to invite you for the next hour and 15 minutes to think together about, to try to stay at this level, try to stay at this unit of analysis where we're all sharing and all have a common characteristic that could be the unifying factor that brings us all together again. So, okay, so what does it mean to be human, and why is this important right now? Well, it's important right now because neuroscience is giving us some incredible evidence to show that this issue of dignity matters and that we need to pay attention to it. So, for example, there is this huge gap in our knowledge about the shared human characteristics that we all exhibit as a function of being a human being. So let me just tell you one thing that was shocking to me when I learned this, that 95%, this is what the neuroscientists tell us, 95% of our behavior is driven by unconscious forces. And we're going to go into this a little bit more later on, but what they're telling us is that this 95% is really driven by deep emotional drivers that each and every one of us, no matter where we're born, what part of the world we live in, these fundamental drivers are really responsible for so much of our behavior. So I'm thinking, wow, you know, so they have this metaphor of the rider and the elephant. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but basically what the neuroscientists are saying, that we are the riders on this elephant, and we think we're the ones in charge, but the 95% is actually the elephant. So we've got this confusion, this misconception about how much in control we are of our lives and in our behaviors. And until we understand this, and until we know what we're up against as human beings, and until we recognize that dignity is the core thing that triggers this 95% of our behavior, if we don't understand that, we're really in trouble. So here's our goal. Our goal in understanding the dignity work is to make us more giving the rider instead of the elephant more power in our decision making. The dignity stuff, knowing what it is that triggers us to bad behavior, that triggers us to when we have our dignity violated, and it makes us feel so angry and emotional. Once we understand that and we can figure out that this dignity, using this language, can really help us expand our emotional capacities. We want the rider to be more in control than the elephant, and that's our goal. And let me just say one quick thing, because I heard in Stephanie's introduction of Lou that he works with leaders all the time. Well, most of this work that I do now, I actually pitch as leadership training, dignity leadership training, because one of the things that's coming out here again, what does it mean to be human? And the answer to that question, one of the pieces of research that's been quite consistent over the last several years is that people feel, with surveys taken in the workplace, people feel who are the followers, people who are employees, they were asked to describe what they felt a good leader was, and actually more the case, what they felt a great leader was. And what they said is, in the report, they said that a good leader has to understand the technical aspects of his or her job. But a great leader, on the other hand, is someone who knows not only the technical aspects, but who also has this knowledge of what it means to be a human being, how to treat people, how to respond to people when they come with grievances, how to respond to people when they've made a mistake, and even more importantly, how to bring out the best versions of the people whom you lead. So we don't have a whole lot of dignified leadership, and understanding what that looks like is really part of the challenge here, I think, because we do need leaders. We do need people to help us through this. And one of my favorites is Nelson Mandela, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But a good leadership is absolutely essential in an organization. And all of the work that I do, if I go into an organization, it's about working with the leaders to help them understand the significant aspects of this human knowledge around dignity. And it's fascinating to see how quickly people recognize the importance and actually integrate it into their leadership styles. So, and that's about as much as I'm going to say about that, because now I think our first task is really to come to terms of what dignity is. And frankly, I don't spend a lot of time trying to make this a fancy definition. I, in fact, try to make this as simple as possible. And for me, it really boils down to a couple of factors. And let me just stop right there for 1 second and say, typically when I ask people, like if we were having an interactive session here, I'd ask you what you thought dignity is. And people 99% of the time say respect. And they say things like pride, they say things like honor, they say things like value. Well, all of that's true, and in a minute I'm going to tell you why I think dignity is very different from respect. Another basic misconception about dignity. So again, all right, back to my simple definition. My simple definition is that our dignity is our inherent value and worth. And if you get a picture in your mind of an infant baby, I actually usually have a bunch of slides that I use when I give these talks in person. And I have this one slide of this beautiful infant baby who's being held in his father's arms, just very, as if the baby were, well, it is fragile. And you can see how carefully the father is holding this child. And if you look at that baby and you say, well, does this person have inherent value? Well, of course, we are thrilled when these little infants come into our lives. We're just crazy thrilled. We see the miracle of this birth and of this life, this new life. And we would never say this child doesn't have value. In fact, we would say this child is invaluable. This child is priceless, and it's irreplaceable. And so along with that value and worth, the other half of my definition of dignity is we're both valuable and vulnerable at the same time. So again, get that picture of that little guy and the little girl in your mind, the little infant baby. Yes, you can see how vulnerable physically that child is, just by the way, the father is cupping this child and carefully, holding this baby. But we don't tend to think so much about how vulnerable the kid's dignity is as well. We tend to be very concerned, of course, we're concerned about feeding it, making it comfortable, making sure it isn't unhappy in any way. And I'm just shedding some light on how important a little one's dignity is and how that has to be nurtured along with the nurturing of his or her physical, being. So dignity, again, inherent value and vulnerability. And by the way, folks, that vulnerability goes on and continues throughout our lives. We are never, ever free from the vulnerability of having our dignity violated. Just as we're always vulnerable to having our physical beings injured or violated. So we have to think about that. It's one awareness that I think is really essential in understanding dignity and understanding the human experience. All right, why is it different from respect? Well, here's the thing. I think our dignity, our inherent value and worth, something that each and every one of us is born with. We're all born with an equal amount of value and worth. But respect, on the other hand, frankly, I think respect has to be earned. And the reason this was so important to me to make this distinction is that when I was working, and I continue to work in the field of international conflict, I cannot tell you how many times people will say, we demand respect. We demand respect. And then, the other party sort of rolls their eyes and says, oh, yeah, you demand. I think it would be way more effective if the parties would say to each other, we demand to be treated with dignity. We demand to be treated as a human being. We want to be treated fairly. We want to be treated as if we're someone who matters. So I'm really clear in my work that there is an important distinction here. Because I think the reaction, just simply the reaction to saying I want to be treated with dignity versus I want to be treated with respect, it elicits two very different feelings inside us. All right, so one last thing I want to do before I share some elements of dignity with you is I want to go over some research that completely shifted my understanding of the importance of human dignity. So the research went something like this. This is, again, neuroscientists. Thank goodness their research is so abundant now on the emotional aspects of our shared humanity. It has completely helped me go out into the world and say we have to pay attention to dignity, and here's the reason why. And here's the reason why. This research was done where people were put through brain scans, the functional magnetic resonance imaging. And they were exposed to different experiences. What they found was that when people had their physical bodies injured in some way, let's just say for a moment that somebody breaks an arm, the pain of that shows up in the brain in the very ancient limbic area, a part of our brain that developed early on in the evolution of our species. And so that's not so surprising, right? I mean, you would expect something that is so painful to hurt, that hurts so much, to show up in this profoundly emotional center that, that guides all of our emotions. So that's that. But all right, here's the big. Somebody's phone's ringing. All right, so I'm just a little thrown off by that. Let me just go back and say that the research showed that the area in the brain that got highlighted on these brain scanners when a physical injury occurred was this ancient emotion center. Now, the interesting part about this research is that they showed also that when dignity is violated, when someone tries to humiliate you, treat you badly, it also shows up in the brain in the exact same area as a physical wound. So folks, the brain doesn't know the difference between a wound to its dignity and a physical wound. I mean, I have a wonderful set of slides here that I usually show to indicate that this, I think this finding that when we have our dignity injured, we feel it as deeply as we feel something physical. Yeah, but if you think about what happens, when we have a dignity violation, there's no 911 call as there is when you break an arm. There's no emergency room that you run to. And in fact, we tend not to even talk about dignity violations because they're embarrassing. It's embarrassing when somebody treats us badly. And in fact, they just end up stockpiling inside us until we have an opportunity, to perhaps talk about it. But it's, again, because of the humiliation that goes along with the dignity violation, people usually clam up and don't say anything. So, and this kind of suffering, honestly, puts our lives on hold because we are so used to internally having this pain that just doesn't go away from feeling unworthy or feeling less than. And let me just say one more thing about this research. I actually think a wound to our dignity is far more painful, because a wound to your physical being, you don't get demonized, you don't get degraded, you don't feel less than when you hurt yourself physically. But when your dignity is violated, it does, and you have to deal with all of that. The lasting effects of humiliation, and it doesn't go away on its own. So that research completely affected me in the sense that it gave me the data that I needed to take this out on the road and speak as passionately and as forcefully, really, and as urgently about how important I think it is for all of us to understand what it means to what human dignity means to all of us. And for those of you who are, in coaching positions, all of you are actually obviously are working with people. I mean, I think there's a real urgent aspect to this work, because I think so much of the suffering that I see in people in relationships in the workplace are really boiled down to not having an opportunity to talk about ways in which the work environment is violating dignity. Because first of all, people don't feel safe to speak up in work environments. They do not feel safe. I've done studies on this, and it's a consistent problem in the workplace where people just do not want to say, especially speak up to their bosses, right? I did this intervention in a major corporate intervention for many years, and part of the trying to get the dysfunction out of the system, out of the workplace, is giving people an opportunity to speak up and helping them with that when they felt their dignity is violated. Okay, one last thing I want to tell you about before we move into some of the basic, describing the 10 elements of dignity. It's a wonderful story, actually, because, and it really has to do with whether or not, it has to do with helping people understand, whether it's your clients, anybody, helping people understand why it's important to know who has the power to, whether anyone else has the power to affect your dignity, to take away your dignity, excuse me. I used to think, before I started studying this, I used to think that other people, if they treated me badly, they had the power to strip me of my dignity. But I was really wrong about that. And let me tell you a short story why I was so wrong. So I have worked in the past with Archbishop Tutu, and it's a long story, but I wish I had time to tell you about it because it was a wonderful experience. But one of the things that he said to me is, so Donna, you're writing a book about dignity. If you want to understand a certain fundamental piece about dignity, you have to read Nelson Mandela's book, A Long Walk to Freedom. And so I said, well, of course, when I go home, we were working in Northern Ireland together, but I said, as soon as I get home, I'm going to read his book. And the reason he wanted me to read this book was because he heard me say that he heard me say that I felt that I thought people had the power to strip me of my dignity. So this is why Nelson Mandela's book was put into my on my radar screen. I read it, and the aspect of it that was so directly relevant to this was that when he was describing going into Robben Island, you know, he spent 27 years in that terrible jail in South Africa. And so when Mandela went into the prison, he decided he really had to figure out what the guards were up to if he was going to survive. So he went in and didn't, you know, felt like within the first day he figured out what the guards were up to. And guess what? What the guards were up to was trying to strip them meaning he and his fellow political prisoners, strip them of their dignity. And he instantly said, well, I was relieved. And I'm thinking, relieved? What is he talking about? And he said, nobody is going to win that battle for my dignity because my dignity is in my hands only. And no one has the power to strip me of my dignity. And in fact, he believes that essential knowledge, deep human knowledge about his dignity was what got him through those 27 years. And he went on to say something really important, which is people have the power to assault my dignity. People have the power to trample on my dignity and to really injure my dignity. And we need to be sure that we heal from those. But that's very different from saying people take my dignity away, because it's that powerlessness that people feel when they feel their dignity is stripped. And honestly, this is a source of resilience for him. This was what got him through, knowing that no matter what happened, that his dignity is intact. And it also reminded me of Viktor Frankl. Maybe some of you have read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He was a guy who survived the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. He said basically the same thing about his ability to make meaning of his life. But this is, I mean, I think, frankly, people, I think this was the greatest gift Nelson Mandela gave to the world, telling us all that our dignity is always with us. We may betray our dignity, but it will never betray us. And it's a source of power. It's a source of meaning and purpose. And it also gives us humility, because we know if I've got that dignity, so does everybody else. Okay, so here you go. That was those two things about dignity. You know, the fact that the research showed that it showed up in the brain in the same area as a physical wound, and the fact that this new insight for me when I first started reading about this was, you know, that it's always in our hands, our dignity, and that we need obviously to pay attention to it and take care of it, but it never abandons us. That was just such a powerful and empowering reality for me, experience for me, and I hope it is for you. And this is one of the things I think, if you could communicate to the people with whom you work this essential human truth about what it means to be human, is that this dignity is always with us. So, you know, I'm going to take a little pause here and see if anybody wants, Lou, whether we think perhaps people might want to make a comment or...
Sure. Let me ask a few questions. First of all, the question has been raised. You just have a few slides, and this is the first, and you're going to be moving to the second out of 4 very soon.
Right
but
now.
no one is missing anything, and we have not moved on intentionally, and we're about to move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Second of all, someone asked for the reference on the 95% of great leaders, and the elephant, if you will.
Right.
If you have the research on that, I know a lot of it is similar to the research on emotional intelligence and great leaders, that so much of it is the impact and understanding and awareness of emotion. Do you have a specific article that you can refer to there?
Yeah, well, yes, I work with a group of people at MIT, and Emile, I'm trying to think of Bruno, E-M-I-L-E, and Bruno is B-R-U-N-E, Bruno, B-R-U-N-E-A-U, I believe. By the way, if people can go on my blog, and I've referred to Emile in this blog, and I can try to get a reference from him, but he gave a talk at this conference at MIT that I attended about a month ago. So I can follow up with Emile to see if he actually has a reference, but would that be all right, Lou?
Sure. If you can get back to people, that would be great.
Right.
People are raising the question of the context of this within coaching. And I know we're going to be getting to that significantly when you finish up talking about what is dignity and how can it be violated and how much control do we have of it. But one question that's come up several times by people is that the culture of an organization and the culture of a society can significantly impact and assault and put into question the dignity of individuals, even though the control of it can't necessarily be taken away. Can you talk just for a moment about the impact that leaders can have on setting cultural norms, and how within a coaching environment, the leaders that you deal with, what you do with them to help them understand that and affect that?
Well, let me do it in the context of the next slide, okay?
Sure.
So that we can move on with this. So one of the things that I do when I try to establish a culture of dignity in an environment, in a work environment, is, whoops, why isn't this advancing? Whoops. I don't know why my slide isn't advancing. Stephanie there? Wait a minute. Oh, here we go. Okay, I got it. So one of the things that's really important when I work with leaders in an organization and when they ask to describe what it's like to establish a culture of dignity, making these, what I call the 10 elements of dignity, explicit, having an understanding of what it means. What does it mean to honor somebody's dignity? So first of all, it means everybody's identity is accepted in the organization, no matter who they are. And this is important because people often feel judged based on their ethnicity, on their race, on their cultural background, on their religion. So, and honoring people's dignity in a work environment, everybody's identity is accepted. And also, just assume that this need for having one's identity accepted is at the core of their experience. Secondly, recognition. People need to know that that they get recognized for doing a good job, let's say. We all deserve a sense, praise and a pat on the back if we work really hard. People love recognition. Acknowledgement is another element of dignity. People like to have, let's just say somebody violates your dignity, and there's a basic human desire to have acknowledged that the wrongfulness of that dignity violation. So we all crave acknowledgement when something happens to us that feels unfair or wrong. So inclusion, here's another one. If everybody in a work environment doesn't feel a part of something greater than themselves and feel as though they're included in the purpose of the organization. So when people feel on the margins and left out, it's they feel their dignity is violated. And this could also show up in terms of, let's just say you have a staff meeting and somebody has been left out of that staff meeting who feels like she or he really wanted to be a part of that staff meeting because they were working on the topic, the project that was being discussed. So inclusion, being mindful of the importance of inclusion, being mindful of the importance of safety. Safety, and I'm not just talking about physical safety here. In fact, I'm talking about safety, as I mentioned earlier, about, for example, the need to feel safe to speak up when something is happening in this environment that doesn't feel right, when people feel that their dignity is being violated. So feeling safe to speak up and feeling safe and free from humiliation is a fundamental requirement of establishing a culture of dignity. And of course, fairness. You know, we all want to be treated fairly. We want to be have a certain amount of freedom in our jobs. We don't like being micromanaged. We want to be understood. We don't want people to rush to judgment about who we are. It's so easy to quickly, you know, use a stereotype or use some kind of a shortcut in trying to understand someone. But people desire to be understood, and again, it's another fundamental aspect of creating a culture of dignity, giving people the benefit of the doubt. Here's another one. If you want an environment in your workspace, in your workplace, that is a trusting environment, you have to, as a leader, for example, or anybody for that matter, even employees, have to feel as though they're trusted. And the first thing that happens on the other side of this, if you're a leader and you do something that violates people's dignity, the first thing that goes is a sense of trust. And they're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt if you've done something in the past that's been hurtful. So benefit of the doubt is really critical in a culture of dignity. And finally, accountability means if you end up messing up and violating somebody's dignity, the important thing to do is to say you're sorry and to, you know, agree that you're going to work on the behavior and not violate people's dignity again. So these are 10 ways in which, if you have these as a part of an agreed upon set of guidelines for your work environment. Because you see, the thing of it is here, everybody wants this, whether you're a boss or whether you're an employee or whether, you know, you're a direct report of some managers. This is something that could be the basic and fundamental guidelines for the relationships, the rules, as it were, the rules of the relationships of the organization. These are the expectations of the way we want to be treated.
So Donna, let me ask a question if I could.
Sure.
A lot of people are asking questions about culture and about the coach's influence on the culture and the leader's influence on the cultures. A couple people brought up, especially within a medical environment and medical training, that often the leader is felt has their dignity assaulted, and cultural norms are set up where there is unconscious, if you will, norms of people not being accepted, not being recognized, not being acknowledged, not being included, not being given the benefit of the doubt. And so let us say that we're a coach, and as we enter into an organization, before we even have a coaching contract, we see that there are norms within the culture where dignity is an unconscious elephant that is assaulting people's dignity, and that although the individual leader that we're being asked to coach is being the scapegoat, if you will, or the person who's being accused of causing people to feel less than dignified, less than having dignity, or less than being accepted, or less than being understood. What they're really doing is they're fitting into the culture. And the question is, what can we as coaches do to call the organization and put the elephant on the table, and not allow it to be pinpointed on the individual leader, where it's a cultural norm that the leader is simply feeding into. Right. Can you talk at all about the issues that you've come up with when you've done training around dignity with leaders in organizations, and the things that coaches can do to put that elephant on the table?
So two things that come to mind. First, I want to point out that what I'm talking about now are interpersonal dignity skills, basically. Understanding these elements of dignity and knowing how to then, in turn, treat people as though you accept their identity. How do you give recognition? How do you acknowledge when you've done something wrong, and and listen to the grievances of your people? How do you include people's safety? And going through this whole list. So that's the interpersonal dimension of this work. And yet there's another dimension, which I think the listeners are alluding to, which is the dimension of the structural indignities that go on, the systemic indignities that go on within a culture and in the workplace. And my experience, I've had really bad experience with this, and I've had really good experiences, and I learned from my mistake. And the bad experience with trying to address this culture was that I failed. I failed to go and get the attention of the top leadership team, because, and instead I went into a certain department in this company and worked with that department rather than work with the leadership team. And one of the things that I never do ever anymore is work with a subgroup of people instead of starting at the top with all of the decision makers and the power, people who have power to affect change. Because with them, with this leadership team, and this may be different from what the coaches do, and I don't know, it may be the same, but my focus in the beginning when I go into an organization is to be absolutely sure that people in those leadership positions, A, know the interpersonal skills that are necessary to honor dignity, but secondly, important that they also know how to assess the dignity, the culture of dignity. What are the norms that are guiding these undignified behaviors? Trying to make those explicit. We have that discussion before I even begin to take the work into, into the other aspects of the company. But if you don't have buy-in from the top, it's really hard to try to affect that toxic culture that the participants were referring to, and the norms that have become acceptable. So number one is one identifying the elephant that's creating these, these unconscious forces that are permeating the culture. But we have to, it's a deliberate, my experience is that it's a deliberate act of helping people aware of the effects of these toxic elements in the workplace.
If I can share a quick story that I think reinforces what you're talking about. Not all of us have the privilege or are in a position of being able to get to the top of an organization and deal with the executive team. Over time, that hopefully happens, and hopefully you're brought in at the top if that's possible. But very often you're not. Recently, I was brought into an organization where the espoused values around dignity were very high. This is a fair place. It's a great place to work. It's been voted one of the best places to be employed. People love it here. The executive leader, the CEO, is someone who truly respects individuals, and people are acknowledged, and all of that was true. And interestingly enough, I noticed that I, as a coach, being brought in, was treated with less than acknowledgement, recognition, acceptance, fairness, and independence. I was not given the benefit of the doubt. I was made to wait 45 minutes before I met with the CEO, 3 times in a row. I was canceled last minute. I was told one thing and then found out something differently. I was not included in a decision around the coaching. They keep on moving things out. And so all of the espoused values and cultural norms around dignity were not being shown in the way that I was being treated. And I often find that the way that a coach is treated is often the way a leader is treated within an organization. And so one of the things that over time I've gotten the chutzpah to do is that in the meeting with the CEO, after the first meeting where I was not treated as well as I might, and the second meeting where it was canceled and then delayed, I was very clear, and I said to the CEO and the head of human resources, I only can work with organizations where the leader of the organization is a partner.
Right.
Where I'm not treated as a vendor, where I'm not treated differently, as I'm treated with equal respect. because I find that the way that I'm treated is similar to the way that the person I'm going to be coached is treated. And so what I really need to challenge here is whether or not what you've told me this place is like is really what it's really like, so that I can decide whether or not I sign the contract with you and work with you, knowing that the coaching won't work unless dignity is built into the culture and built into the way the person will be coached. Can you talk a little bit about, Donna, whether or not that's something you've seen and something you found as a consultant?
Oh, this happens all the time. This happens all the time, Lou. So here's the thing. Talk about having an understanding of what it means to be human. People think, with all the best intentions, these leaders think that they know what it means to treat people with dignity. They just think, they've got this gut feeling that they know what to do, but they don't. When I work with the leaders and I show them this list of 10 elements of dignity, because I say to them, okay, tell me what that looks like on your day-to-day, your agenda. Show me the evidence of what you do that honors people's dignity. And then they go on, nothing. I mean, there's nothing substantive that comes out of it. I show them this list of identity, recognition, acknowledgement, these 10 elements of dignity, and they turn to me 9 times out of 10, and they turn to me and say, I've got work to do. So, and then, learning this stuff isn't just a matter of reading the list of 10 elements either. I work with them. I work with the leaders to say, okay, we're going to do some role plays now. How would this, what would it look like, for example, if, you recognize people, you acknowledged them when they come to you with a grievance? How would you respond? Let's work it through. Really basic stuff, Lou. This is not really complicated. You don't need a PhD to figure out how to do this. You just need emotional practice, basically, because most people have really good intentions, but they don't know how to do it. That is the basic cause of leadership failures, is not any absence of intention, but they just don't know.
So if I can build on what you're saying, a couple things that come out of that. First of all, is that we all have a choice to be made when we enter into an organization where we're going to be doing coaching, and when we're entering into a relationship with an individual that we might be coaching, or with a group or team that we might be coaching, to either accept what is in a less than dignity supported environment,
right,
and do it for the money and do it for the contract, or to build into a contract with how the coaching will be done and how the person who's going to be coached and how the coach will be treated, to build into those elements of that agreement dignity supporting components.
I like that. I like that a lot, Lou, because first of all, I spent the first part of this session describing, what the basic fundamental aspects of dignity that most people are just not aware of. For example, when I give out that information about the brain doesn't know the difference between a wound to your dignity and a physical wound, that usually captures the attention of a CEO. Because what, some of the times with these so-called emotional dignity issues, they say to me, oh, they got to just get over it. I'm not here to hold people. I'm not here to babysit. And I say to them, well, wait a minute, you must understand this, because this is what human beings, I don't care whether it's your employees or anybody in the world. People need to have these things. If you want to value your employees, this is what you do. There are steps that you must take in order to do that. And just this idea of telling, oh, this is all touchy-feely stuff, this is all nice, Donna, no, we can't say that anymore, because so many of them dismiss it just simply because, oh gosh, I'm going to have to pay attention to this now, that kind of an attitude. And I think making it explicit the way you just described, this is what it's going to look like when we engage in a process together, in an educational process together, that we're learning about this and we're partnering together. See, I use the partnership model all the time when I talk about how I'm working with people. And actually, I use it to also demonstrate that that partnering model is something that is a culture that they may want to encourage, because it's a fundamental aspect of honoring people's dignity, making them feel like they're a part of something, right? Not just that they're getting their paycheck and going, but they feel included. They feel like they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves. That is the key for.
Great. I think it would be really, really helpful to go on to the next piece, because I think this is really going to show things that the coach can do and things that the leader can be coached to do to not allow themselves to be violated.
Okay, so here's the other last piece of information that I learned about what it means to be human that I think is absolutely critical for any coach to know, or any client that you have. This was also quite shocking to me when I read this literature on evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, that it's related to the 95% that I alluded to earlier. So we have all these instincts in us. They were part of a legacy that's part of the evolution of the human species from, the early days 100,000 years ago to what we've evolved to now. People, understand completely this idea that we have a fight and flight response. This is not unusual. Most people know this. But what evolutionary biologists are telling us is that those are just two responses. We have so many other evolved psychological mechanisms that we're born with, the psychological reactions that we have to feeling threatened, not just fight and flight, but so, for example, if we feel like we're in a threatening situation where someone's coming at us, our self-preservation instincts kick in, and one of the things that it makes us do is take the bait. So what's taking the bait? Taking the bait is returning a violation to, let's just say, now we're talking about dignity. Let's talk about dignity violations now instead of violations to our physical beings. But when somebody violates our dignity, and one of the first reactions that we have that's hardwired in us is to take the bait, to want to return the harm, to figure out some way of getting even. The desire for revenge is all caught up in this one. Another one of these self-preservation instincts is saving face. Well, so when we're subjected to feeling like we've made a mistake and we're exposed having made that mistake, well, our instincts are to protect ourselves and to cover that up, and to want to even lie and deceive so that we don't feel that exposure and that humiliation of being made publicly, exposed before we're ready to expose. So my favorite face-saving guy is Lance Armstrong. So his instinct to cover up, to deceive, I actually think he even deceived himself. But this is what we do. These are the power of our self-preservation instincts. Shirking responsibility is very connected. By the way, these are all connected, but false dignity is trying to look for dignity outside of yourself, like in the form of needing to get the job promotion. It's basically getting your sense of well-being from external sources rather than that Mandela consciousness that I talked about earlier, that knowledge that your dignity is strictly inside you, and you don't have to, look for external sources of it. Although, it's nice to get recognition and a pat on the back and all of that. I'm not saying only depend on your internal sense of dignity, but we just have to have a balance of that. And false security is another thing that we tend to do. Is we stay in relationships, whether it's a work environment that's toxic, we tend to make excuses. Oh, well, it's going to get better. It's going to get, I don't know if I don't really have the power to say anything about this situation. And we avoid confrontation. All of these are self-preservation instincts that are getting us to not do the thing that is necessary to actually maintain our own dignity. We also are hardwired to assume that we're the innocent victim in a failed relationship. This happens at all levels. Resisting feedback. Nobody likes to be told that they're doing something wrong. And the tragic part about this is if we're if we're 95% driven by unconscious forces, we need feedback. We need feedback from others to tell us, to hold a mirror up to us. And yet it's like drinking vinegar getting feedback. And in fact, in an organization, this is the lion's share of the work that I do in trying to create a culture of dignity, is helping people feel safe enough, both the managers, supervisors, leaders in the organization, making them feel safe to accept feedback, and making the people who are the employees who need to give that feedback, training them to become skilled at giving feedback. Because this, by the way, this is the big elephant in every organization. The failure to be able to speak up and to give feedback to people in that culture, to address the dysfunction in the culture that someone alluded to before earlier in the message. And you know, the other thing that often happens is that we blame and shame others to deflect our guilt. This is another hardwiring. And gossiping, finally. So when let's just say you're in an organization and you don't have that feeling that you're safe to speak up to the people who are violating your dignity, to your bosses, what happens is the energy of that dignity violation has to go somewhere, and it usually goes into the gossip mill. And it's really not very dignified, you know, talking so disparagingly about people, instead of going to them, giving them feedback, and trying to address the situation. So I'm making this case here that, and I'm not making the case, it's the biologists who are telling us that we have to know, we have to pay attention to the fact that we all are up against these self-preservation instincts. These are things that we all have to work on. We have to work on restraint, holding ourselves back before taking the bait. You know, instead of doing all these deceitful safe phasing measures, be strong and be courageous and be vulnerable and be bold and stand up and say, you know, I have made a mistake. This is the other thing. Leaders need to be modeling this. The people with whom you work, you could work with them on recognizing that these self-preservation instincts are part of the 95%, that these are the things that we have to control before they control us. You know, interesting, there's a biologist who I love to quote, he says, biology is not destiny unless we ignore it. So if we as leaders and the people with whom you work, if they don't understand that this is the stuff that gets us into trouble and makes us look bad as a leader, we don't look good when we shirk responsibility. We don't look good when we try to save face. So Lou, I think the fear of looking bad in the eyes of others is what these instincts are to protect us from. They're wildly rampant in the business world, and they're wildly rampant everywhere, frankly. And it is our job, I think, our job as educators, coaches, people, you know, who have this information, helping people with this and doing it in a compassionate way. Because the 95% doesn't understand, doesn't know, we don't know what we don't know. So helping people understand that we are all human, we've got these dignity issues that are, you know, looming for every single one of us in every single relationship that we have, whether it's at work or at home. This is what we're up against in trying to develop really strong, powerful relationships, learning how to manage these things.
So let me raise several issues and questions and open it up here in our last 10 or 15 minutes, if that's okay with you, Donna. I think, first of all, what's just to state the obvious here, what we're looking at is a really good lens to think about defense mechanisms that within, you know, we've known for 100 years, over 100 years, that there are the unconscious defense mechanisms that we use to protect our psychological well-being. But dignity gives us a good lens to talk about that with our clients. And if we as coaches can think about this on 3 different levels, it might be helpful. And then I would welcome people to ask further questions about this, and I'd like to tell one story. So the 3 lenses are the dignity of the individual, that the individuals that the leader leads, so the employees within the organization and within the teams that they lead. Second of all, the dignity of the leader as part of the coaching process and as a leader within the organization. And then third, the dignity of the coach, both as an individual working with an organization or with an individual, and as part of a consulting or a coaching group, and how that coach is treated often when they are given a project to work on as a coach and aren't necessarily treated as a partner, as an equal partner and a person who has control over their destiny and how they do the work. So if we think of those lenses, here's a quick story. Recently worked with a very senior leader within a financial service organization, and the investment return was not very good in their portfolios. And in this group, the leader is truly a person who you would say would be very dignity oriented. They're very supportive, they're very respectful. And yet what they were not aware of, what was unconscious, what the elephant on the table was, is that when I then actually went in and observed them leading their meetings and interacting with others, there was a lot of humor used to make acceptable the undignity, the lack of dignity within the team culture. That people were blaming each other, that they were avoiding confrontation, they were not dealing with issues of respect, that there were certain one or two individuals within that group that were sacred cows and allowed to do things that were contrary to the stated culture and respectful values within the organization. And the leader was not aware of that. And bringing it up once was not going to make the leader aware of that in a way that they could actually change it. And so it took months of getting that leader to start to change the way that they dealt with those sacred cows within the team and within the organization who were not treating each other, other people within the team and within the organization with dignity. They were gossiping about those people. They were using humor that was sarcastic. They were not providing security for individuals, but rather making them feel vulnerable. But only the coaching was not a simple thing to do. It truly took months before that individual, although at first they became aware of it, they kept on laughing about it as something that was just part of the team. And if you're part of the team, then it's just something that's there. And, you know, everyone just understands it and accepts it. And it's okay because they're all aware of it. And, you know, when you join the team, that's the way it is. But it literally took months until the end of the coaching before the leader's manager and the senior partners of the organization would no longer accept that happening by that leader. And they held them accountable to do something different. And the leader themselves held them accountable to do something different than allow these temptations to violate people's own dignity and each other's dignity within the team. So I'd like now to just open it up to any questions that people have, and Donna, for any comments from you about what we can do as coaches in these three different arenas: the dignity of the individual within the organization and as a member of a team, of a leader, the dignity of the leader being coached, and the dignity of you as a coach as you're treated by the organization who's hiring you and by a coaching organization or consulting firm for who you are doing coaching. Issues that come to mind, questions that you have. Donna, any initial?
One last quick comment about that.
Please.
So what I've done when I go into an organization to try to establish a culture of dignity, I do a dignity assessment using the 10 elements of dignity, and I do an assessment using the 10 temptations to see where the work that needs to be done. And you ask people, you interview people, and you say, to what extent do people feel comfortable speaking up here? To what extent do people open to feedback? How vulnerable do the leaders make themselves when they make it. How do they handle mistakes? That's a really good question. How do they handle, what do you do when you don't feel safe enough to speak up? And you will find that at the heart in those assessments and in the dialogues you have with people, the 10 temptations are almost always active in a dysfunctional organization. So using these two handouts as in fact, I think Stephanie has these as handouts that she can send to people if they want them. This is a very easy tool in doing interviews with people about assessing what the work, dignity work that needs to be done, what it is.
Thank you. One of the participants is asking the question about recovering personal dignity, and especially within the coaching context. What have you experienced in all of your work around conflict resolution that has applied within business organizations and nonprofits where dignity has been violated, and even though it's under the control of the individual to own their own dignity, what can be done to recover dignity for an individual, with an individual, and within an organization?
Yes, that's a very important question because it makes a distinction between the fact that you always have your dignity and needing to heal from a dignity wound, right? Those are two different things. Those two things are true side by side. We always have our dignity intact, but remember, people do have the power to injure our dignity. And as Nelson Mandela warned us, those wounds need to be healed just like any other wounds. And what I have found to be the most effective and simple way of getting people to take those wounds outside of themselves, externalize them, if you would, is simply by telling their story. And when I work with I like to work with small groups in a setting. I know you typically work with one, but let's just say you only have one client or you have a group. Either way, giving people an opportunity to talk about the ways in which they felt their dignity had been violated. They tell the whole story. And then what I do after they tell the whole story is I take the elements of dignity, that list, and I show them, I said, well, no wonder you felt really, terrible in that situation. No wonder that was an injuring experience because look, your identity wasn't accepted. I'll go back to the elements of dignity. Look, you didn't get the recognition that you deserved, or you were treated unfairly, or the guy didn't give you the benefit of the doubt, or the person didn't include you in a meeting. Is it any wonder you felt bad and you felt your dignity was injured? So here's the thing, once they tell you the story, to be sure they get it out and to the extent to which they feel it's finished, you go then and you use these tools to say, oh, show them why it was so difficult, because like say when you talked about your dignity injuries in that environment, Lou, almost all of the elements were involved. No wonder you felt bad about that, right? So telling the story, giving people a framework to see and externalize it, and acknowledging for them that nobody should have had to endure that kind of treatment in a work environment. That's how, and sometimes it takes more than once telling the story to more than one group, to more than one person. That's helpful. I would encourage them to go and tell, their story to other people who feel safe to them, that sort of thing. And I'm mindful that we're running a little bit low on time here, unfortunately, Lou.
Yes, and a couple things just to state perhaps the obvious to some, but not necessarily to everyone, and that is that a lot of traditional coaching is one-on-one. But more and more people are, especially in senior coaching, are moving the coaching into a relationship coaching and a team coaching, where the coaching goes on not with just one individual, but during a coaching session where something comes up, rather than do role playing, that you actually bring another person into the room as part of that coaching. Or rather than talking about a team as though it's out there, to actually go in and observe that team and do shadow coaching as part of your coaching work, where you're shadowing the leader within the team and working with the whole team around getting them to tell their stories of how they feel within the team and what they could do differently, and literally coming to a a vulnerability contract, if you will, with one another, about what they can do to be vulnerable with one another in a positive light, and to show a sense of dignity and to treat each other with dignity.
Yeah, they need a sense of safety for that. That's what you could create as the coach in that coaching environment, right? Is a sense of safety, feeling safe to be vulnerable.
Exactly.
Because
And
vulnerability is where the truth is.
one of the participants asked the question, why bring up a new concept of dignity when it's so close to respect? What have you found that the term dignity and the concepts within dignity does to allow an individual or an organization or a leadership team to take it more seriously, or to add some value rather than just talking about respect?
Well, as I said, I think dignity is very different from respect. So I just want to circle back to that first misconception that I tried to highlight right in the beginning. That dignity is an inherent aspect of every single person's DNA. We all are born with dignity, just like we're born with 2 arms, legs, brains. We were all born with inherent value and worth. Respect, on the other hand, I don't think respect is part of our inherent being. I think we have to earn respect. We can say we want to respect people's dignity, but it's a confusion that makes people, I think, covers up the fact that every single person deserves to be treated with these 10 elements that are up here right now. But when you say respect, I feel when I say I respect someone, I want to say I really admire that person. That person is somebody that I want to be like. I'm giving that person a real sense of honoring of that person, because he or she went way beyond the call of duty. I respect Nelson Mandela for everything that he showed us in his lifetime about what it means to be an exemplary human being. Dignity is everybody has it. So it's totally different in my mind, completely different in my mind. And the other thing about using a dignity framing is that people don't like to talk about their emotional wounds. I have found this everywhere I go. But if you frame the problem that people are experiencing not as being emotionally weak or vulnerable, but if you frame it as, no wonder you feel bad because your dignity has been violated, there is a certain sense of validation that people feel when you talk about their dignity and all the vulnerability around people's dignity and how everybody reacts the same way when they have their dignity violated. It's just, again, it's part of this human knowledge that, and making that distinction between dignity and respect is at the core of it.
Thank you so much. I know we've run out of time, so I'm going to hand it back to Stephanie to finish up. Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Lou. Thank you so much, Donna. This was so insightful and such a rich dialogue. So I thank you so much. I think there are a few questions that weren't answered. So Donna, I'll forward those to you after the webinar with those folks' email addresses. And Donna, is there a way that folks could reach out to you directly?
Oh, right, sure. I forgot. Yes, I was going to. Here's the book. If anybody, I just touched the surface. I just gave you the appetizer version of this. If you really want to know more about everything that I've said and go into much greater depth, then please take a look at my book. And also, you can write to me at dhicks@wcfia.harvard.edu. And I have 2 websites. The first, declaredignity.com, and the second one, they're both lowercase. I don't know how that happened, but it's drdonnahicks.com. I have a blog there. So anyway, this is my contact information, and I'm more than willing to answer any questions. Especially, lots of times people feel like they need to process this and think about it a little bit, and you can just write to me. Please feel free. I'm very open to that. So, because I always learn something from these exchanges too. So,
I'm also happy to take any questions from anyone if they'd like, and you can just reach me at executivecoach@comcast.net.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. Thank you, everybody who participated today. Again, this webinar will be made available, the recording will be made available tomorrow on our ICPA website. And with that, I wish everybody a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.